Before a woven textile becomes a thing on a wall, a thing in a catalogue, or a thing called a Navajo rug, it begins with a physical act that commercial language rarely captures. A thread passes across a taut field of warp. It is pressed into place. Another follows. The work advances row by row, close enough to the hands that a buyer, a trader, or a later museum visitor may never see all the choices involved. That distance is the starting point of this story. For more than a century, shoppers in the United States have encountered a familiar phrase, Navajo rug. It appears in trade histories, collections, advertisements, and the language of the Southwest market. The phrase is useful in one narrow sense. It tells a buyer that a woven textile was being sold as a floor covering, a furnishing, or a collectible. But the phrase can also make a living dinner work sound anonymous, as if the market category were the whole history. It is not. The question is not who invented Navajo weaving. The historical record does not support that shortcut, and it gives too much authority to the people who later bought, classified, and sold the work. A better question is more specific. How did a Diné weaving practice become widely known through the commercial label Navajo rug? What did trading posts change in the route from loom to customer? And what can the surviving trade records never tell us by themselves? The most useful public record for that investigation sits in Ganado, Arizona, at Hubbell Trading Post. The National Park Service says John Lorenzo Hubbell bought the post in 1878. That date matters because it places the business in a difficult period of Diné history, 10 years after Diné people were permitted to return to their homeland following the incarceration at Bosque Redondo. The post was not an empty building waiting for a market to arrive. It operated in a country where Diné families already had work, knowledge, kinship obligations, livestock, travel routes, and decisions of their own. A trader could offer goods, extend credit, set a counter between producer and distant buyer, and promote what he wanted customers to value. None of that makes the trader the author of the textile. That distinction is easy to lose when the surviving archive is a business archive. A ledger is built to follow goods. Its columns favour dates, quantities, accounts, deliveries and payments. The loom favours something else, material, tension, time, and the practiced judgment of the person weaving. The counter sits between those worlds. The National Park Service describes Hubbell as having an enduring influence on Navajo rug weaving and silversmithing, and says he consistently demanded and promoted craftsmanship. That is a significant institutional assessment. It tells us that the Ganado Post mattered in shaping a commercial environment. It does not say Hubbell created Diné weaving. It does not tell us that every weaver welcomed the same terms, made the same choices, or worked for the same reasons. This episode will stay with that difference. We will look at the textile as an object made through labour. We will look at the trading post as a place of exchange. We will look at the archive as a powerful but limited witness. And we will return to the simple fact that a market label can travel farther than a maker's name. In the next step, the story moves from the loom toward the road into Ganado. That route helps explain why the word rug became so common. It also shows why the word can never be the final answer. Picture the route without turning it into a postcard. A textile has weight. Wool has to be prepared. Yarn has to be available. A loom needs a stable place. The work takes time, and a finished piece must be carried, displayed, exchanged, or kept. At the trading post, those material facts met a different system. Shelves, ledgers, supply networks, visiting customers, and the expectations of a national market. Hubbell's business grew beyond a single counter. The National Park Service says that, at various times, Hubbell and his sons owned 24 trading posts, a wholesale house in Winslow, stage and freight lines, and other business and ranch properties. That scale helps explain influence. It created routes through which goods, preferences, and information could move. It gave one commercial network a way to reward certain qualities, connect weavings to customers, and turn local work into something legible to buyers who lived far from Diné communities. But influence needs to be handled carefully. It is not a synonym for authorship. It is not proof that commerce dictated every design, and it is not a verdict on every exchange that took place at a counter. The trade post system could make a finished weaving visible to a buyer who did not know the maker. It could translate a complex object into a category, a size, a price, and a description. It could encourage a customer to think of a textile as a furnishing called a rug, rather than as work made by a particular dinner person in a particular household and time. That translation had consequences. It made circulation easier. It also made simplification easier. The word rug therefore tells us something real but limited. It tells us how an object was offered in a market. It does not tell us all that the object was before it reached the market. It cannot tell us whether a particular weaving was made to sell, made to keep, altered for a buyer, or shaped by circumstances that a ledger did not record. It cannot turn a family's work into a generic background for someone else's business success. This is why the material process matters. A woven textile is not simply an image. It is rows of yarn held in relationship by warp and weft. It is preparation, handling, correction, and endurance. A photograph of a finished piece may show colour and form. It does not show every pause in the work. A sales record may show that an exchange happened. It does not show what the maker considered successful, necessary, beautiful, or worth keeping private. The archive at Hubble Trading Post is unusually large. The National Park Service says the museum collection includes more than 350,000 individual items, including a family archive of 264,000 business records. That is an extraordinary concentration of documents. It allows historians and researchers to study a durable commercial world in remarkable detail. It is also a reason to be precise. A large archive can tempt us to believe that everything is there. It is not. Business records are excellent at preserving the activity of a business. They are much less complete as a record of every Dini household, every artistic decision, every negotiation that happened away from the counter, or every meaning carried by a textile after it left the post. The difference becomes clearer when we follow a finished weaving toward a customer. The buyer may see a pattern, a size, a price, and a name for a region or style. The maker had already faced the more immediate reality of fibre, time, work, and choice. The trading post connected those realities. It did not collapse them into one. That is also the moment to resist two opposite myths. One says, a trader simply discovered an art that had been waiting for a market. The other says every commercial exchange erased the maker's agency. Both reduce a complicated system to a single moral role. The records support a harder answer. Trading posts mattered. Dine weavers mattered. The terms of exchange mattered. And the archive keeps some parts of that history in sharp focus while leaving others outside its columns. If a ledger can show an exchange, then the next question is obvious. What exactly does a ledger leave behind? The answer begins with method. When historians use a business archive, they do not ask a ledger to be something it was never designed to be. A ledger may establish that a post operated in a place, that goods entered or left a system, that an account existed, or that a commercial relationship had a recorded form. It can reveal scale and routine. It can make a distant market visible. But it does not automatically provide a complete biography of the person whose work passed through that system. That limit is not a failure of research, it is part of the evidence. In fact, naming it makes the surviving records more useful, because it keeps us from turning a commercial paper trail into a story of total knowledge. Imagine two images side by side. In the first, a bound volume lies open on a table. Its pages are ruled into tidy columns. In the second, a loom stands after the day's work, yarn still stretched across it. The ledger is made to organize exchange. The loom is made to hold a process. Neither image needs to be romanticized. They simply preserve different kinds of information. The risk comes when the market's language becomes the only language. If every textile becomes only a Navajo rug, then a phrase built for buyers begins to stand in for the whole work of Dini makers. The phrase can remain useful as a historical market term as long as we remember what it leaves out. It leaves out variation. Dini weaving cannot be reduced to one universal appearance or one story. A documentary should not pretend that every colour arrangement, form or household practice has one public meaning. Some information is not in the sources, some knowledge belongs to particular people and communities, and some of the most responsible narration is the decision not to claim more than a market archive can establish. That caution is especially important with images. A close photograph of wool can show texture. A view of an upright loom can explain a physical process. A historic trading post building can locate a documented commercial setting. None of those images should be presented as proof of a private intention, a ceremonial meaning, or a universal Dine identity. This is the correction at the centre of the story. The commercial history is real, and it is worth studying. The National Park Service's account makes clear that Hubble's post had lasting influence, and that the family's operations reached across a considerable trading network. But that history should lead us back toward makers, not away from them. The post at Ganado also did not vanish into a closed past. According to the National Park Service, the Hubble family operated it until it was sold to the agency in 1967. The historic site remains active as a trading post through a non-profit partner. That continuity is not proof that present-day commerce is identical to 19th century commerce. It is a reminder that the place has a long, changing history rather than a single frozen moment. Here is a useful question for the middle of this investigation. When you encounter a museum label, a catalogue entry, or a market description for a woven object, what information would you want beside the price and place? Would you want the name of a maker where it is publicly documented, the materials, the date, the community context, the limits of the record? If this kind of source-led history is useful to you, leave one comment. What detail would help you see a handmade object as more than a product? That is the only invitation in this episode, because the next part returns to the answer itself. The answer is not that the word rug must disappear. It is that it must be placed in its proper position. It belongs to the commercial story. It cannot contain the full story of dinner weaving. To finish, we have to return to the loom, not as a symbol of a vanished past, but as a way to see the limit of the market frame. Return to the first thread crossing the warp. By the time a woven textile reached a historic trading post counter, a great deal had already happened that the counter could not fully absorb. Materials had been handled, time had been spent, the work had been judged and adjusted by the person making it. The trader and the buyer entered the story later with their own systems of value: inventory, transport, display, and sale. That is how Navajo weaving became widely known to many customers as the Navajo rug. Not because a market invented denier weaving, and not because every sale meant the same thing, but because commercial networks gave a buyer-facing name and route to textiles made by denier weavers. Ganado and Hubble Trading Post were part of that route. The National Park Service's history supports the post's importance, and Hubble's lasting influence on the trade. The surviving archive gives that influence a physical scale. The same evidence sets a limit. No ledger can tell the entire story of the hands at the loom. It can record a transaction. It cannot automatically explain a maker's full intention, household circumstances, or relationship to every pattern and material. A market term can describe how an item circulated. It cannot replace the maker, and it should not flatten diverse denier work into a single decorative category. That is why the most honest conclusion is neither a celebration of the trading post nor a simple condemnation of it. It is a clearer map of the relationship. The loom, the road, the counter, and the archive all matter. They do different jobs in the story. The loom shows that a textile is made through practiced work. The road shows that the object moved through a landscape and an economy. The counter shows where trade translated it into a commercial form. The ledger shows what a business chose to record, and the archive shows both the power and the boundary of surviving documentation. For viewers today, the phrase Navajo rug may still be the phrase encountered first. It should be a beginning, not an ending. Ask what period is being described. Ask whether the maker is identified in a public source. Ask what the label tells you about a market, and what it cannot tell you about the work. Those questions do not diminish the textile. They make the history around it more accurate. They also protect against another easy mistake, treating denier art as if it belongs only to the past. Hubble Trading Post remains an active trading post, but its historic rooms and records should not turn living denier makers into illustrations for a 19th century business story. The work is not a relic waiting for an outside institution to explain it. Public history can document a place of exchange. It must be careful not to claim ownership over the people whose labour made that exchange possible. So the documentary's answer is modest, but firm. Trading posts helped create the market path through which many buyers came to know denier, weaving as the Navajo rug. The documented history of Ganado shows how one influential post helped shape that path, yet the market name is only one layer. Beneath it are makers, materials, labour, decisions and histories that no sales category can fully contain. The final image is not a ledger closing on an answer. It is a weaving still on the loom, yarn continuing beyond the edge of the frame. That image does not claim to reveal what should remain private. It simply returns us to what the commercial label tends to hide in plain sight. The object began as work in denier hands, and its history is larger than the name printed for a buyer. There is one more reason this distinction matters. Historic trade language can make a textile seem finished the moment it enters a collection, shop or display. The material record says otherwise. Wool wears. Colours shift under light. Edges show handling. A weaving is not just an image carried forward from a distant decade. It is a made object with a physical life. Careful public history pays attention to that life without pretending to possess every story around it. That approach changes the viewer's position as well. Instead of asking only whether an object is old, rare, or valuable, we can ask how it was described, who had the power to describe it, and whose work becomes less visible when a market category takes over. Those are not questions with one answer for every textile. They are questions that keep the archive honest. Ganardo's preserved post can therefore be read in two directions at once. It is evidence of a commercial institution with real reach, and it is evidence of the limit of institutional records. The more clearly we see both, the less likely we are to mistake a trader's archive for the complete history of denier weaving.